Well, thank you all for coming to the Rulemaking Advisory Committee meeting on SB 338, the Limited Renewable Energy Technician License Scope. Thank you for your interest in this issue, and we really appreciate your taking the time to volunteer and for your feedback on these issues. So if you will look in your welcome packet, you will notice my name as well as Keith Anderson, the Electrical Program Chief of Building Codes Division, is here as well. But I would like to welcome everybody here and kind of go through the members to introduce yourselves as well if we could. So in order to not have everyone step on each other, why don't we have last names A through M introduce themselves, and then we'll go N through Z.
Brian Krieg, representing the Oregon State Association of Electrical Workers.
Julia Heyer, Julia Heyer, Senior Policy Analyst with the Building Codes Division.
Sorry, Julia. Lauren Bowling, representing the National Electrical Contractors Association.
Brian Mayfield, OCM member and LRT number 4.
I'm Todd Smith. I'm the Interim Enforcement Manager with the Building Codes Division.
Nathan Phillips. I'm an electrical contractor in Eugene and policy analyst for NECA.
Robert Westerman, IBW Local Union 932 and the Association of Electrical Workers.
All right, and I have the two callers introduce themselves.
1783 numbers, Ryan Tribbett.
Excellent.
One of them might be mine. This is Keith Anderson, Electrical Program Chief.
All right, I think that is everyone. Thank you, Keith. And just so everyone knows, we have two other members of the division in conference room A at the Building Codes Division in Salem, recording this as well. All right, so first issue on the agenda to kind of keep things organized. Just as a general outline of the issue, SB 338 recently passed the Oregon legislature and was signed into law by the governor. The bill declared an emergency and took effect on its passage, and a copy of the bill is part of your packet for this meeting. That's down at the bottom. The bill modifies the scope of work to the Limited Renewable Energy Technician License. It does several things, increasing the kilowatt limit of electrical installations on which the LRT can work, and allows the LRT to install AC electrical wiring and connections to the termination of the final factory-provided interconnecting cable on the exterior of a structure that extends a minimum distance of 10 feet from the renewable energy system, or a longer distance that the board specifies by rule, and extends no more than 3 feet within an accessible space of a structure and does not connect to that structure's wiring system. So at the Electrical and Elevator Board's May 2021 board meeting, the board approved the division go ahead with some temporary rulemaking to enact the requirements of this recently passed bill. And that would specifically be OARs 918-282-0033 and 918-282-0400. These temporary rules were adopted on May 27th and are also attached to your board meeting packets. And let's see, the division is also seeking some input on this. Obviously, that is why you are all here. And these issues are the ones that we would like your feedback on. And so the first issue is the distance for the AC wiring that I mentioned above. It allows the LRT to make those connections to a maximum distance of 10 feet from the new renewable energy system, or a longer distance that the board specifies by rule. So we would like to hear your feedback on this particular issue first, and then we'll move on to those other issues.
Well, this is Nathan Phillips. I'll give you my feedback. I think it's a position of NECA, at least, and I'll just speak for NECA and myself, that the temporary rule as written adequately provides for the needs of industry, and extending that length further than that opens up the potential for challenges in compliance, where we have AC wiring running around on buildings that is potentially run by, it's not clear who is running the wiring, and it makes it difficult for enforcement to have clarity about, to assure that the licensing rules are followed. So we support the temporary rule as written, and would advocate just turning it into a permanent rule.
It's Robert Westerman. I got a question on process first. Is the recommendation from this Rule Advisory Committee going to the electrical board to make the decision?
That's correct, Mr. Westerman. Whenever possible, the Building Codes Division likes to get rules advisory committees together for their feedback on issues like these. We will be bringing these recommendations that you all collectively make to the Electrical and Elevator Board, who will either approve permanent rulemaking or will not, and will, in the end, decide the terms of that rulemaking.
BW concurs with Nathan Phillips and Nika's position on this issue.
This is Ryan Mayfield, and I see that Eric Hansen has joined us as well, another OCM member. And so I guess I would like to, see if Eric has any comments on this. I think that OCS position would be, if we could extend that some, it would be more ideal. And the unfortunate part is just the length is, I think, as we all, when we were coming up with the language originally, it was relatively arbitrary. So I'm not sure that there's going to be a great consensus otherwise. But Eric, do you have a good way from the field to give some input on a extended length? Eric, you're muted if you're trying to talk at all.
Oh, there we go. Okay, I'm sorry, I had technical difficulties. Could you restate what we're talking about now, Brian?
So this is part of the discussion right now is the 10-foot length, and so we're trying to come up with a recommendation. So this advisory committee is going to come up with the recommendation to the Electrical Elevator Board to either keep maintaining that 10-foot length or change it, extend it, since it is written as a minimum of 10 feet.
Right. And your idea, your position?
Well, the position that's been thrown out there is maintaining that 10 feet. And of course, I would advocate for going longer, maybe 25 feet. The distance from maybe a second story down to a ground level type of distance. But that would be, a suggestion that I guess I would have for consideration.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, when we're up on the roof and we transition, it would be ideal to bring it down to the journeyman's ground floor work where they're doing their work on the AC side of things. So yeah, I concur again. When we're up on the roof, we could do everybody a favor if we could bring it down to the disconnect. Anyone?
I guess Nathan or Bob, I don't know if since you've put in your...
Well, I'll respond to that. I think that we're well aware of that convenience factor, but we don't think that that it overrides the compliance issues that we're concerned about.
And I'm sorry, again, what are those compliance issues you're concerned about?
As AC wiring is run around on buildings for a variety of purposes, it creates a compliance issue for inspectors to determine who ran the wiring. When there are license holders that can run AC wiring in those locations, but are not licensed to do those installations, and there's already been problems with those issues under the previous statute, and we don't want to create more problems. Maybe, I don't know, Keith could probably speak to this as an inspector better than I could.
Well, it's one thing to point out the obvious, that generally the only wiring coming off of a roof is from a solar electric system. So I hear you, and those low voltage trays, I think is what you're referring to. That might get messy down on the main floor. But when we're up on the roof, we're the only ones bringing wires off. So that may or may not be a real thing for inspectors, but that's my input, because we're already transitioning, at that junction anyways. So whether it's 10 feet from the array or whether it's down on the ground, we're still doing that transition. I guess my perspective is that we're the only ones doing that work. Let's just bring it down off the roof and keep the journeyman off the roof. Who we've got specific roof safety training and special tools that a general journeyman doesn't carry around with them.
Not all structures that get these systems installed on them are two-story structures. So you have to consider that this would apply to single-story structures and other types of installations, and not just residential.
Correct. Right.
This is Keith Anderson, electrical program chief, and I'll just follow up. Nathan asked a question about the enforcement part of it, and of course, whatever you decide on, what that line is. I mean, that is what we use to enforce, our field people, look for out there on these installations. And one of the largest complaints, or most common complaints that we have with these AC systems, because it's mainly a branch circuit that's being installed, to the solar panel. And what we find in the complaints that we have is that the LRT, or a lot of times they have a journeyman on staff, and they will go ahead and run that circuit down and into the panel and go ahead and set the breaker. The other side, when it's a DC system with an inverter, it's real clear that it's a DC circuit, and the LRT is authorized to make that connection, to the directly to the inverter. So anything that helps clarify, this for the enforcement team, keeping it on the roof or limiting it to the 3 feet inside the attic is very clear. So is the DC conductors. So anyway, that's all that we ask, for the licensing on the enforcement end is, I like to have it as clear as possible, and getting too far away from the array on the roof, it does complicate it. So anyway, that's my experience with it, and add that to your conversation.
Hey, this is Todd with Building Codes. I'll just jump in real quick. Just to let everyone know, just kind of recap some of the process history here. As you know, the division is kind of under a time crunch to get this process wrapped up and finished to get to permanent rules. So we're going to need to get there in some fashion. If this group isn't able to come up with any agreement on what the length should be, we'll be moving forward to send what we currently have as a proposal to the board. But that doesn't mean the discussion has to be over. There still have opportunity to discuss it in front of the board. You'd have opportunities to discuss this again during the public rulemaking hearing as part of the process. And then there's also a possibility that we could open the rule back up later as people get more familiarity with the license if they decide that some other length is appropriate. I know that this rulemaking hearing kind of stuck up on people pretty quickly due to our time constraints. So I know that everyone hasn't really had a chance to process session and process the bill and have the detailed discussions they might want to have on this topic. But we do appreciate you being here today. So I'll leave it at that for now.
So what is the process for this group making a decision? Is it a vote or is it a consensus? What?
Ideally, Nathan, it would be a consensus. Again, this is Tyler Glaze from the division. Ideally, it would be a consensus, but I'm happy to take a roll call vote from the members present. I'm happy to do it however the group sees fit, if there's no obvious disagreement.
Yeah. Well, we don't seem to be reaching consensus, so I guess I understand all the arguments. I think we in the NECA and IBW, I think I can speak for Bob and IBW on this, feel pretty strongly about this, that, crossing that bridge from AC to DC was a pretty big bridge for us to cross legislatively. We went along with that, but we really want to limit it because we're concerned about the unintended consequences and unforeseen things. If certainly happy to revisit it at a later date if if situation changes and we recognize that it could be expanded. But that's what we're comfortable with now.
Well, this is Eric again. I know that this 10-foot got inserted kind of after I stepped to the side of the process, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around the importance of the distance. And, as far as advancing the license, we're very excited about the cooperation that we've had with IBEW and crossing that line from DC to AC and really legitimizing this part of the trade for the LRTs. So, I think I represent the voice of my fellow LRTs, probably not every single one of them, but most of us feel that we want to transition at a logical juncture, which for us is, rapid shutdown, disconnecting means. But, we've conceded on this to push it forward. So, if 10 foot is what is happening, I think we're all, just ready to move everything forward with that. But as a solar electrician, I can't understand why, transitioning right at the array or whether, we come off the roof and do it at the disconnecting means is that big of a deal to an inspector or to another journeyman electrician, supervising electrician, inspector, or anything for that matter. I mean, it might be easier on the inspecting community if we transitioned at that disconnect as well. We don't want politics to get in the way of advancing this. So I think we're never going to raise our hands and vote anything excitedly for anything otherwise. We're grateful that we're making progress here. We're moving forward, and I would definitely lobby to visit it in the future or just go ahead.
Eric, I apologize. I think you broke up for the last 7 or 8 seconds of your statement there.
Okay, thank you. I'll restate. Yeah, I just want to conclude by saying we're grateful that this is a bill that passed and we're moving forward, and we have good relations with the IBEW and the independent contractors, and you know, we definitely vote for.
I think we lost you again there, Eric. He's gone from green to white. So we will, if anyone else would like to add some input until we can get Eric back.
This is Ryan Mayfield.
I'm glad to hear that you you appreciate the support of IBEW and the independent electrical contractors. That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that with us.
So, yeah, so I think where Eric was going was, you know, keeping this moving forward. Seems like the 10 feet is going to kind of be where we're settled at this point. You know, I think we would enjoy and like the opportunity to bring it up again. And as I believe it was Todd saying about as we get more experience with this and everything like that.
That's probably Western. I think that OSEA and IBEW and the National Electrical Contractors Association can have discussions about this offline, but I do believe it's important that we get this resolved and put into place. And it sounds like everybody here, if not happily, is in agreement that we can move forward with a 10-foot rule.
Okay, so if folks don't mind, I'm going to just ask the group as a general matter. It sounds like the recommendation from this committee is to leave the language in the temporary OIR 918-282-0400, subsection 4AE, which includes the maximum 10 feet from the renewable energy system in place. Is that correct? Is there anyone who disagrees with that?
I'm sorry, this is Eric. I got dropped and back again. I missed that.
Hi, Eric. We just wanted to make sure that it was the opinion of the group, the committee here, to leave the language as is with the maximum of 10 feet from the renewable energy system in place for the time being, and have additional discussions down the road. Is that correct?
Okay, thank you. Copy that.
I do not see anyone disagreeing, so I appreciate that that recommendation from the committee here. So we will move on to issue number 2. That is whether or not to otherwise adopt the temporary rules as permanent rules. Do we have any disagreement that these temporary rules should become permanent rules as far as the recommendation from the committee?
Tyler, can you clarify? Does that mean what we were just discussing, bringing the 10 foot again in the future? How does that play? What does that, this issue number 2, how does that play into that?
Hi, Ryan, thanks. So the 10 foot, as far as the recommendation from the committee as it stands right now, it would be to leave, as far as the rule language is concerned, it would leave that maximum 10 feet in. And then the second part is whether or not to actually adopt those, recommend adopting those rules to the board as permanent rules, or leaving them as temporary rules where they currently stand. So if we were to recommend leaving them as temporary rules, they would expire after 180 days.
Oh, I see.
So what the division is trying to do is engage in permanent rulemaking, or at least go to the board and recommend permanent rulemaking. But we wanted the feedback of the committee as to whether or not they felt these should become permanent rules. Now, even though they are called permanent rules, as Todd mentioned, they could potentially be reopened in the future if further discussions took place that was the right approach to take, and then those permanent rules could be changed if that was the agreement of the board.
Thank you. Okay, that helps. And then if what happens at the end of 180 days if they are left as temporary? Is that another meeting has to happen and we need to find a way to making them permanent?
essentially, we would need to enact these permanent rules to comply with what the law is now, which is SB 338. So these temporary rules are just trying to comply with that. If you did want those rules extended, if you were to decide to say to the board, hey, let's leave these as temporary rules, and then at the end of those 180 days, the board says we would like these rules extended. We don't want them to expire because then, you know, the division would be out of compliance with those rules. And the industry we would all have some issues not complying with that Senate rule. So essentially we would need to either create a new rule that then complied with those rules or extend them further. But really the temporary rules are eventually needed to comply with the law as it stands.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on Tyler there for real quick. Due to other issues going on from DOJ and the way they're looking at temporary rules these days, we don't really have the option of doing another temporary rule on this. Our only option is to, they would expire and they'd go back to the older rules, like Tyler was saying, which are based off of what the statute said before session. So the rules wouldn't make any sense. They wouldn't really be enforceable. Or we have to go to permanent rule. So we would we would recommend as the division to the board to go ahead and make what we currently have as the temporary rules permanent. But then also, like Tyler was mentioning, permanent doesn't mean that they're set in stone. So if the stakeholders here felt that there was a reason to change them, we could always do that in the future.
Okay, thank you.
So Todd, this is Eric again. Would we do that by appealing to the elevator board to get on the agenda for a vote with all the stakeholders? Is that the process after it goes to permanent rules?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, there would be some opportunities during the permanent rulemaking hearing if this group came up with a different number that they could have a consensus on. They felt that should be for the distance. That could be incorporated as part of the rulemaking process. If we got through the permanent rule process and there was no consensus, and say, you know, next spring or whenever, if people had some other thoughts or wanted to come back and change it, yeah, the process would be to go in front of the electoral elevator board and let them know that there's an industry request to kind of take another look at this issue. And then we can start a new rulemaking process to make that change.
Okay, copy that. Thank you.
So sort of to get things started here, does the committee believe that this should become a permanent rule or that it should be left as a temporary rule and then altered in some way? How does the committee feel about the permanent rule issue?
I'm strongly in favor of making it a permanent rule. I think letting it expire would not be helpful to any of our interests. And, you know, there's always an opportunity to request that the division open a rule for rulemaking, and if there's consensus formed, then that can happen.
I concur.
So as well, Mr. I do believe it needs to become a permanent rule as soon as possible.
All right, then I guess
I'd agree.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I will go ahead and say, does the committee agree that this should become a permanent rule? If anyone disagrees, please speak up now. All right, I'm not hearing anyone speaking up, so that will be the recommendation we will bring along to the board. And the final issue number 3 on your packet, the division is seeking some feedback on whether the rule change from SB 338 and recommendations provided here will have a fiscal impact and what the extent of that impact will be and whether this rule will have a significant adverse impact on small businesses. If anyone has any feedback on what they feel about whether there will be any fiscal impact from these rules, that would be greatly appreciated.
I think the fiscal impact of this bill will be minimal and has no adverse effect on small business.
This is Eric again. I think the fiscal impact of this bill will help small renewable energy shops. I think it's a positive thing.
All right, and I guess hearing no other additional comments, then I believe the recommendation regarding issue number 3 will be no fiscal impact, or if anything, a positive fiscal impact for certain small businesses. So does anyone disagree with that assessment? Hearing no one, that will be the recommendation of the committee. Is there any other discussion that you folks would like to have this afternoon? Okay, well, great. I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming here today. We're going to assemble the minutes from this meeting, and we're going to take them to the administrator of the Building Codes Division, and then we will be presenting your recommendations to the Electrical and Elevator Board at their next meeting, which I believe is in just a few days here on the 22nd, if I recall correctly. And you can stay up to date on the rulemaking process. If you would like to provide additional feedback on the rulemaking process, we will have rulemaking hearings for the permanent rule by signing up for updates on the Building Codes Division website. At the very top right, there is a tab that says email updates. You can simply click on that and enter your email address and be provided with those updates. And as Todd mentioned, please feel free to come to the Electrical and Elevator Board meeting, which, as I mentioned, is on July 22nd at 9:30 a.m. and provide any feedback you wish to. Otherwise, we will be providing as we said, the rundown of the minutes from this committee meeting. So once again, thank you so much for all of you for coming here and volunteering your time. We really appreciate it.